Welcome to Weather Impact Live. I'm meteorologist Mike Pringley here from St. Pete, being joined by our sister stations in Jacksonville, Florida. At First Coast News, we got a meteorologist Lee Southwick, and of course, WLTX meteorologist from Columbia, Daniel Bonds. Great to be with you. And you saw that little glimpse there of the update. And like both of you have been talking, we're talking about not just a hurricane developing this week into next weekend, but a major hurricane, which is coming a good 3 weeks earlier. And unfortunately, a lot of the models, are still showing a threat here close to home. And Lee, based on this latest information here, it looks like we're still at 45-mile-per-hour winds, but boy, will things change.
Absolutely. Right now sitting in a somewhat unfavorable environment, but it just gets more and more favorable as it tracks west across the Atlantic. And it's going to be our first hurricane of the season. No surprise there. That's on time because August 11th is usually the average when we get our first hurricane of the season. But then we usually don't have our first major hurricane until September 1st. And so likely this is going to strengthen. That's what the National Hurricane Center is calling for in its forecast, a major hurricane by the weekend. So that arrives a little bit earlier. But, guys, one thing I'm watching, of course, that track closely. It looks like it's going to try to stay to the north of those islands. Watching it closely, though, that is a close call for people in, say, Puerto Rico and anyone else who has any sort of interest in the Caribbean.
Yeah, some good points there. And Daniel, here in the Tampa side, on the west side of Florida, it's been a tough few years. I mean, the last couple of years, we've evacuated this building 3 times. This year, it looks like that, the main tracks are starting to shift a little bit differently. It looks like a different type of season for tracks. So in the Carolinas, of course, you had some action earlier this year, and you are starting to see that pattern change. How are folks in the Carolinas feeling about this season, especially compared to the last couple?
I think we're always cautiously optimistic, but it goes all the way back to 1989 when people still remember Hurricane Hugo. Really, that's the litmus test for the Carolinas, in particular South Carolina. And even last year we had Helene move through, not necessarily South Carolina, but it did have a huge impact on us in the Carolinas, even though it basically moved into basically the eastern part of Georgia. So I think we're always cautiously optimistic, but I think a lot of us that have lived here most of our lives are thinking we may be due for something to impact us directly.
Right, and hopefully as we look at the latest models here, we can keep this one away, but a long way to go. So I think the models are in good agreement as we get into the weekend to start through Saturday. I think we've got good agreement once it gets just to the north, scooting just to the north of the Windward Islands. But thereafter, we're seeing all kinds of different scenarios develop. But as we look at the big picture here, notice, we got an X in the Gulf of Mexico. That's the tropical wave that brought Pinellas County right here over 10 inches of rain this weekend. So we're not too concerned about that with a near 0% chance. Then there's another X in the North Atlantic. But yes, all eyes on Erin for sure, as this will be the real deal as it steamrolls to the west as we head into the next few days over that very warm water. And we're also watching it take that track around that big North Atlantic high. So as we take a closer look and look into the last few frames, as it's been tracking overnight, it looks like it's lost some of that big thunderstorm development. But as an invest, this has already caused some big issues. Unfortunately, the Cabo Verde Islands reporting 7 fatalities due to flooding. And these systems tend to ebb and flow. Right now, more on the ebb side. But as it continues to roll to the west, it looks like it'll have some more moisture to work with. It'll get out of some of that thicker Saharan dust we saw it go into overnight and less wind shear. So things can change in a hurry, and also moving very quickly to the west at 23 miles per hour. So as we look at some of the water vapor imagery across the area, we'll continue to watch things very carefully. But as of right now, it does look like as it tracks off to the west, we're going to be watching it going into an environment more conducive for development, right, Lee?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to see, more moisture. These waters are plenty warm. We've been seeing too as the system moves over the Atlantic, moves into the even warmer waters and an environment with a little bit less wind shear as well. And of course, we've got to get away from that Saharan dust, and then it will strengthen. So I think when we talked about how models are in good agreement that it's moving to the west, that it is strengthening, that is not a surprise. We have been talking about Erin for quite some time before it ever was Erin, really before it even became an invest, because models were in such good agreement about this system. And so I do feel it's too early, to clear all of our names and all of our cities out of any sort of big impacts from this system. Of course, we got to wait until it turns to the north, but at least for us here in Jacksonville, and I think for the same for you all in South Carolina too, I think we're at least going to see rip currents out of this system, big swells, depending on how close it gets to the coast too, maybe some beach erosion that we're watching for here as well. So I think there could be impacts from Erin here. Just how significant are they? I like the trends in the models turning it to the north for the most part before it reaches a place like Florida, but I still think at our beaches we're going to have some impacts here.
Yeah, for sure. Rip currents, some nasty seas, and big surf, and we'll have to watch that very carefully. And Daniel, for many of the systems so far this season, we've been lucky. They've been kind of snuffed out and choked out by all that Saharan dust and wind shear. But it looks like, as we look at the models with this system as it moves to the west, unfortunately, it's going into a prime area for development with less of that dust and wind shear for sure, as we take a look at some of those models. And at the same time, as we pull up some of those water temperatures, it's actually over the cooler part of the ocean. It's going into some very warm tropical bath water that will tend to fuel this system as it moves to the west.
Yeah, we knew it was only a matter of time before things started to ramp back up, obviously, as we continue to move through the rest of August and into September. And you can tell from those waters, they are very, very warm. So that's just adding fuel to the fire as this continues to move across the Atlantic. And then we're going to keep our fingers crossed, as y'all have been talking about. Hopefully it turns a little bit more towards the north and away eventually from the continental United States. But y'all were mentioning the rip currents. That is, I think, is going to be a big deal for Florida. It's going to be a big deal for the Carolinas because, as you guys know, our beach season can continue into maybe even to October for us here in South Carolina. So rip currents, as of now, big deal, I think, across South Carolina and North Carolina.
And what we try to get across to folks even here in Tampa and St. Pete, rip currents cause more fatalities every year than the severe weather you think of, like the tornadoes and the lightning and the flooding. So it will be a big deal here as there's so many people, still folks on summer vacation as well. And we will have to keep a close eye on that. So as we look at the latest models, I think we've got a good handle as we get to the islands, but I want your opinion on this. As we look at some of the different scenarios, you see the American and the Euro model are starting to differ and much more in the long term. So it goes to show you every little bit of change can make a big difference. So if you look at the Euro and the green and the GFS, we're comparing the models, and notice they do pretty well as we get to just to the north of Puerto Rico. But then after that, we get into next Monday, about a week from today, 7, 8, 9 days out. And boy, you're a little too close for comfort based on some of the latest Euro models. We got the Euro coming much closer to the Carolina coastline, while the American model has this behaving, so to speak, as it takes a recurve out to sea. So as we look at the latest trends, this is another reason, Lee, you've been saying we can't give the all clear just yet, right?
No, absolutely not. And this is something that we have several days to prepare for and watch for. I think it's great that we can give people such a big heads up these days and that they're well aware, but I don't want people to be panicking yet because it's so many days out and a lot can change. As you mentioned, we have it through the weekend. We know that it's going to be, moving towards places like Puerto Rico or just to the north and strengthening and potentially into a major hurricane. But from there, there's still uncertainty because it's too far out. So I like that we can give people such a big heads up, but we can't give people exact scenarios yet when we're talking about later on into next week. And so there is still a lot of uncertainty with these models. They keep bouncing back and forth. I've seen the European swing closer to land here for the southeast U.S. and then further out to sea. So it's just a reason why I tell everyone, and I'm sure you all are saying the same to your viewers, do not panic yet, but check back in for updates each and every day because things continue to change. As Erin continues to strengthen and grow and get closer, we will know more. Models will continue to get a better grip on this system. And of course, as that time gets closer, we'll know more. But this is why it's better to be prepared right now. Don't panic, but be prepared and make sure that you continue to check back in for updates each and every day because things are changing each and every day.
Yes, in fact, Daniel, we take a look at some of the scenarios. We're showing most of the models showing a recurve, and I showed you see the two big high pressures on the map, but based on your extensive experience with tropical meteorology. We know things can shift around, and every little change can make a big difference. So scenario number one, I've been showing this. This is the escape route, but like Lee, I've been reiterating, hey, we got to check back every day. We're not even close to giving the all clear because there are some different ensemble runs that have different things happening. There's some that still have it heading toward Florida, a few toward North Carolina. And of course, do you have this issue in the Carolinas with folks, posting, of course, the one model that has it heading toward land? So we just have to remind people, be careful of who you're looking at, what you're talking to and looking at on the web here, because a lot of rumors can get started. And that's why we're here. This is why we have triple coverage with this hurricane to be Erin. That'll be a major hurricane as we head into the weekend, it looks like, here to dispel any rumors. Right, Daniel? So how do you deal with that as a meteorologist in the Carolinas?
Yeah, a lot of times we make sure we're telling people to take information from those trusted sources, not the Facebook guys who are just trying to get clicks or the Twitter guys that are just trying to get clicks. We tell them to watch us, obviously, and make sure you're getting your information from trusted sources that you can count on, somebody that's not just trying to make a little bit of money on social media. But we've had a lot of people ask about this particular storm. I think a good point Lee was making just a second ago, this isn't going to sneak up on anyone because we've been tracking it for quite some time and things can change pretty quickly. So we're still talking, 8 to 14 days out from now, things can change and it could have an impact. And it only takes one storm to cause a huge impact to your area. So that's the biggest thing we've been emphasizing.
Yes, some great advice there. And so that's scenario one. And then on the maps, I'm going to scroll through here to scenario number two. So a lot is dependent on this high pressure, how strong it is, exactly where it's setting up. Will there be a weakness in that high pressure? And a lot can change in that 8 to 10 day window you were talking about, Daniel. So here's another scenario where we have a stronger high pressure across Bermuda, and there's really not much of a weakness in it, okay? Maybe a small one. So as it crosses the Atlantic here, we've got Erin becoming a hurricane. And instead of taking that turn more out to sea, like we've seen, a scenario two would show a stronger high pressure and unfortunately a threat to the southeast United States before recurving, especially toward the Carolinas. So Lee, what are your thoughts on the scenario number two, especially for the Carolinas with that stronger high pressure?
Yeah, so that's obviously the scarier scenario, and why we can't write the system off. Why no one can, even here on the First Coast, because if it gets too close to us too, we have bigger surge issues. But for those in the Carolinas, that's why they need to be watching this so closely, because there is the possibility that that Bermuda high stays stronger and therefore it steers the hurricane a bit closer to the coast. Now, again, a lot of these models have had it turn before that, but this is why we say we're not in the clear, because it is a possibility. We're talking about it not to scare anyone, but just to, again, try to encourage everyone to keep updated, keep checking back in, because that is so far into the future that things could change. It is possible that the Bermuda high could stay stronger and therefore send this soon-to-be hurricane towards the Carolinas. So something for everyone to watch. Impacts all across the southeast coast. Anyone who has interest there, I know a lot of people here even have vacation homes from Myrtle Beach to Charleston to the Outer Banks, and so it's something that we're all watching very closely.
Right, Daniel, you brought up the history. The history is so important in these situations. We have to remember the past to get an idea of what's happening with the future. And a lot of times as meteorologists, we look at water temperatures, we look at weather patterns. Where is the high pressure setting up every year, right? And this year it seems to be a little bit farther off to the east. So as I've been looking at all the maps, it seems like there's more of a tendency to be a stronger Atlantic season at this point. And as we take a look at some historical tracks, I've got the 2018 season pulled up as one of my analog years, one of those years that we can learn from the past to forecast the future. And you can see as we zoom in, we actually had this set up in 2018 in some respects, where we were waiting for Florence to recurve around that high pressure, but it was stronger and it was not picked up by the weakness in the high. The high pressure was so strong it continued to barrel to the west and then move toward the Carolinas in 2018. So just another example of why we're here with our triple coverage, keeping everybody calm first of all, and just making sure we stay with the trusted sources and keep our guard up, make sure we're prepared. That's a big thing, right, Daniel?
And Florence in particular was very devastating to South and North Carolina, produced a ton of river flooding, and over towards the PD, the Grand Strand, and eastern parts of North Carolina, just a terrible, terrible flooding situation there. It wasn't necessarily the wind or the storm surge, but the river flooding just caused huge problems with Florence back in 2018. That's one we sometimes tend to forget because we've had so many of these storms impact the United States. But you're right, looking back kind of gives us an idea of what could happen in the future.
Yeah, and I love this map because it shows mainly fish storms. We went all fish storms, so it only takes one. And look at that, even the quieter Gulf year produced a big ribbon of pink in the Gulf. That's actually a Cat 5 Michael that went up toward Panama City. So we are all going to be watching this season very carefully, one storm at a time for sure, and we'll continue to keep track of this latest on Erin. And this morning, if you're just joining us, we're streaming from St. Pete and Tampa to Jacksonville, Florida, and the First Coast, and all the way up to Columbia, South Carolina, with our experts here to keep you informed, prepared, connected, and safe. And that's the main thing, and calm. And as we look at the overall picture, we've gone over two scenarios. The one scenario I think all three of us agree with. I think we're still favoring the recurve, and we gave that second scenario where that high pressure is stronger. But there's also a third scenario. We have to include everybody, and unfortunately, I still have South Florida, or maybe even the system heading more toward Florida as the third scenario. And let's take a look at why. You can see that big, strong, high pressure. But one thing I've noticed in some of the maps and a couple of the Euro ensembles is this thing could really start to steamroll to the west, pick up forward speed. This could be not just a major hurricane, but we're talking about Cat 4, Cat 5, and it really controlling its environment. So not only do you have the stronger high pressure to its north, but this thing is so strong it just doesn't turn around. It's like a runaway train that it continues to head to the west, and it could possibly still, for our friends here in Florida and our families, watching it carefully as a threat to us. So Lee, again, trying to just give all the scenarios, that's all. Okay, we're not panicking anybody, but your thoughts on the runaway train theory here.
Well, you're absolutely right to bring up the fact that when these hurricanes get so strong that they can kind of control their own environment. So that is something that we should be considering. While a lot of these spaghetti plots that you see don't show that scenario, I think you're absolutely right to mention it because it is a possibility, especially because we do see this strengthening into a major hurricane. And by the weekend even, we do expect it to become a major Category 3 hurricane that if it hits the right environment, if it continues to strengthen, it could go off the tracks a little bit, like you said.
Yeah, and it brings back memories of 1992 with Andrew, and just always have to keep our guard up, and of course for the Carolinas, watching it very carefully. So again, we've got all scenarios still involved from the Gulf, Florida, up to the Carolinas, and Daniel, as you go on the air, a lot of folks are saying, well, we're going to be okay. It's not going to be me. It's not going to be us. So what advice do you give to those folks?
The biggest thing, and I think you kind of mentioned it, is don't necessarily panic, but be prepared, especially if you have property near the coast. And even if you're a little bit more inland like we are in the central part of South Carolina, you can't rule out the possibility if one of these were to kind of come up our way, bringing some tropical storm force winds and some heavy downpours that could lead to some flooding. And just like last year when we had Helene just produce a ton of damage for a wide part of Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina, the biggest message we've been telling people is be prepared, but don't panic. And as always, make sure you're taking information from trusted sources who have your best interest in mind. So don't panic, but be prepared and continue to follow the forecast because we've been talking about it. It can change, and it can change pretty quickly.
Yeah, some good advice there as always, Daniel. And as we look at this track across, if you're just joining us, we've got 45 mile per hour sustained winds with a tropical storm that's over 2,200 miles from Bermuda. So still a long way off, and we have all week to watch this. That's the best part. We all can make sure we're prepared. We have our supplies. We check our list. We know our zones, our evacuation zones, and our flood zones. Some of the issues we've run into Tampa here over the last couple of years, especially with our active hurricanes, is folks that have never seen water come into their homes, they're now seeing it with storms that before would not occur or that would not happen before. So again, even if you think if you're anywhere near water, and the big key is this, you need to heed the warning and make sure you have a place to go. And even if it's never happened to you, like we saw so often here in Tampa with Milton and Helene, folks that have never had water, unfortunately, there was water everywhere and a lot of damage. And here folks in Tampa are still recovering. So whenever we do our tropical updates, a lot of folks are antsy and on edge, and we do our best just to keep everybody calm. So Lee, as we look at the latest with Tropical Storm Erin, the key is, again, have that plan, know your home, know your zone, know if you're in a flood zone, correct?
Absolutely. And something else you mentioned how people had water coming into their home there in the Tampa Bay area. People here in Jacksonville sometimes forget that we haven't had a direct landfall here since the 60s, since Dora. Yes, we have been impacted by so many different tropical systems, but the direct landfall hasn't happened here. And yet still, with indirect landfall or with an indirect hurricane or even tropical storm here along the first coast, we have had problems with surge and with water entering homes and neighborhoods and flooding. And so it's important to remember too, for everyone, but here in Jacksonville as well, that we can be impacted by these storms that don't have to make a direct beeline to the first coast. And we know that from impacts. We were just talking about Helene. Helene impacted all of us, all three of these markets, and it wasn't even a direct landfall. So again, these systems, these hurricanes, it's something that we do have to watch, because even if it's not heading directly in us and our way, we can still see that in terms of flooding from rainfall, from storm surge. We can get those outer bands, winds, tornadoes, all of those different scenarios.
Yeah, exactly. And we have all these scenarios going on, and at the same time, we just have to really make sure we're prepared. And we say be prepared, not scared, and keep checking in. So, Daniel, you were talking about Hugo in 1989. Is there a lot of complacency in the Carolinas? Because really, would you call that the last direct hit? Lee was talking about direct versus indirect hits.
I would say that was the last really strong to major storm that has had that direct hit on South Carolina. And since then, that was obviously September of 1989, the coastal region of South Carolina's population has boomed. So you're talking about a lot of people moving in from up north, maybe some different parts of the country. So they really haven't experienced a direct hit like Hugo. I know personally my uncle was in Hurricane Hugo. He lived in Charleston most of his life, and he said he would have never, ever stayed if he knew it was going to be that bad. And so it only really takes one bad storm to make a big difference, not only on your community, but the individual lives of people that are impacted.
Exactly. And if you're joining us here, we are being joined here with our sister stations up and down the East Coast. So from Jacksonville to Columbia, South Carolina, as we are all watching Tropical Storm Erin here this morning. Just talking it out with you, just making sure everybody's calm and having a plan here. Latest spaghetti models have not changed. We've got a good agreement all the way almost to the Windward Islands as we head into late weekend. And then as we go into next week, things could change in that 7 to 10 day window. So that's why we're here, making sure everybody keeps checking back. Anywhere from Florida up into the Carolinas, even the Northeast is not off the hook. As you can see, this system still expected to split the two high pressures, but at this time, we can't give the all clear just yet. So it's got an escape route, but as we said, there are other scenarios that are developing. And the big thing and the big threat, if there is one right now that we have a grasp on for Florida, would be the rip currents. And as we were talking about, rip currents cause more fatalities each year than lightning, flooding, tornadoes combined. And you can see the big wave heights here, Lee, really starting to come in. And they come in well ahead of the storm. That's what folks don't realize. So even though we're saying, oh, it's still toward Puerto Rico as we head into the weekend, even your area, the First Coast, Jacksonville Beach to Michler's Landing, all the way up to Jekyll Island, should start to see the effects well ahead of the storm.
Exactly, Sunday. So we're expecting to see that rip current risk and the bigger swells increase starting on Sunday ahead of that storm. And then that could last for several days as it stays off the coast. Hopefully it does stay off the coast, and that would continue to bring those beach impacts. And again, not only rip currents, but the bigger swells. And we know some surfers like it. Of course, only the strongest of swimmers and surfers can ever go out there. We need to make sure that we also spread the word to not only locals, but visitors. We were talking about our beach season still in full swing. We have these visitors that come and visit and think, oh, there's a hurricane way out there. It's fine. We need to make sure they don't get in the water because of that rip current risk. And again, too, depending on how close Erin gets to the coast, we'll have to watch out for beach erosion with big swells and several days of it because it does start out ahead. And again, we're starting to see those impacts likely on Sunday, and then that will continue through at least midweek. We could maybe even see some beach erosion, but just spreading the word again about the risk of rip currents, and especially to those who aren't from this area, trying to get the word out that although a hurricane could be several hundred miles offshore, it still makes those waters deadly.
Yeah, and with that major Category 3 or higher, there's going to be quite a swell and a lot of ocean and emotion in that ocean. And Daniel, yeah, we're talking about vacationers and folks that aren't from the Carolinas that we have to worry about as well.
Yeah, I was just looking up some numbers. Preliminary numbers, 52 people have died due to rip current issues. So you're already talking about 52 people. You don't want to add to those numbers. So make sure if you are going to the beach over the next several days, next week or so, make sure you swim near lifeguards, and as always, heed the advice of the local beach patrol.
Exactly. Some good advice. So we really appreciate you both joining us. Lee, Daniel, thank you so much. We got to do this again. This was wonderful.